SOMA is a first-person survival horror game published by Frictional Games, the team behind Amnesia. The game takes place largely in an underwater research facility, with the player controlling a man named Simon Jarrett. At the beginning of the game, you learn that Simon had been in a car accident and had suffered severe brain damage as a result, and was given just months to live. The opening sequence of the game involves Simon visiting a scientist who hopes to get a better understanding of Simon's condition by doing a scan of his brain. Immediately following the brain scan, Simon appears to wake up in a strange place, which turns out to be Pathos 2, the research facility. As Simon explores this facility, he learns that he has woken up undersea more than 100 years into the future from when he got his brain scanned, and that he now exists in the body of a dead woman who had worked on Pathos 2. He discovers that his brain scan was somehow loaded onto a robot, and that the woman's body had been mixed with robot parts. He also meets Catherine, a woman he had originally presumed to be human, but who turns out to be just like Simon, a scan of a human consciousness loaded onto a robot. Catherine tells Simon that the world was destroyed by a comet, and that the only surviving humans were those in Pathos 2, and that she had developed a project called the Ark, which was an artificial world running on a supercomputer. She had planned to scan the brains of her colleagues and load them into the Ark, so that humanity could continue to exist even after the world had been destroyed. She had planned to launch the Ark into space, but Simon and Catherine learned that she had never completed her mission. Simon and Catherine then set out to find the Ark and finish what Catherine started. The facility is also inhabited by a number of hostile creatures that are disturbing mixes of human and robot, having been transformed by the Warden Unit, or WOW. Simon learns that the WOW was an artificial intelligence designed by researchers on Pathos 2 that was supposed to protect human life. When the comet wiped out all human life on the surface of the planet, the WOW began to compensate for that loss of life by scanning the brains of humans and loading them into robots. However, these new human robots were imperfect mockeries of humanity and could not distinguish between humans and threats. This led to the robots perceiving the humans in Pathos 2 as threats, ultimately leading to a robot uprising that resulted in the deaths of almost all the humans in the facility. The game ends with Catherine and Simon finding the Ark and successfully launching it into space after she had scanned their brains and transferred those scans onto it. However, after the Ark is launched, Simon and Catherine are both still on Pathos 2. Simon, thinking he would wake up on the Ark just like he woke up on Pathos 2, becomes angry with Catherine, believing that she didn't scan them or send the scans to the Ark properly. Catherine explains that she could only copy their brain scans onto the Ark, not completely transfer them from their current bodies to the Ark. That is, there are copies of Simon and Catherine on the Ark, in addition to the Simon and Catherine who remain on Earth. The ensuing argument gets Catherine so upset that she short-circuits her body, essentially killing her. Simon is ultimately left alone in the dark on Pathos 2, begging Catherine to come back. After the credits roll, the player wakes up as the Simon on the Ark and is reunited with Catherine as the Ark soars through the stars. What interests me most about SOMA is the role that Catherine plays in the game, because companions in horror games are a super interesting mechanic. What purpose does Catherine serve, and how does having a companion influence the player's experience of the game? In order to explore this question, I will examine an article titled Big Hero 6, The Companion Cube, and the Pathos of the Post-Human Sidekick, written by Matt Margini for Killscreen magazine. The article discusses the role of specifically non-human companions in Big Hero 6, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, and Guardians of the Galaxy. The author argues that the emotional power of companion characters is much greater when those companions are non-humans than when they are human. He begins the article by stating that the non-human companions for human protagonists are a gigantic liability. While this may be true for Big Hero 6, this is far from the truth in the case of SOMA. Catherine, the non-human companion, exists inside of an Omni-tool, which is, as Simon puts it, essentially a door opener. From inside the Omni-tool, Catherine is able to carry out complex tasks and grant Simon access to areas that he might not be able to reach otherwise. So we see that Catherine is not some useless entity that can only follow Simon around and is in constant need of rescue. This, I think, is because Simon is not entirely human and Catherine is not entirely non-human. In that way, the pair occupies a unique space. They are a new take on the classic duo that the article discusses. Margini further argues that the classic non-human companion characters often have some heroic self-sacrifice at some point in their story that saves the human protagonist. For example, Baymax sacrifices itself to save Hero, the protagonist, at the end of the film Big Hero 6. SOMA also complicates this classic trend. there is no heroic self-sacrifice on Catherine's part. She completes the mission that she and Simon set out to do by scanning themselves onto the Ark and launching it into space. However, she still dies at the end of the game, but her death isn't heroic, it's just a result of a conflict between her and Simon. Margini states that the non-human companion is the object of both annoyance and disproportionate emotional investment. Once again, Soma challenges the stereotype of the protagonist-companion relationship, perhaps due to the fact that Simon and Catherine are both human and non-human. Catherine, I think, is an incredibly lovable and supportive character. In playing the game, I became so attached to her that I didn't want to leave her side. Rather, I felt annoyance at Simon for his treatment of Catherine, his brash attitude, and his inability to cope with what was happening. At one point in the game, Simon must transfer himself to another body, a body that is wearing a special type of diving suit. When he learns that Catherine is only able to copy his brain onto the body, rather than outright transfer him, he calls her fucking disgusting and becomes very angry with her. His outburst clearly hurts Catherine and leaves her very upset. In that moment, I was more annoyed with the protagonist than with the companion, which is the opposite of what Margini says we feel towards regular protagonist-companion pairs. I think the reason for this is that Catherine is too human. Simon is able to express his real emotions to her because he knows she'll understand them. If she was unable to understand emotions or express her own emotions, it would not have been as uncomfortable of a scene. This scene really makes the player wonder, what makes us human? Being able to feel and express emotions? Having human bodies? This question of how human Simon and Catherine are or are not is central to the entire game. Margini seems to argue that having a consciousness, even just that of a dog, is enough to make something more human than not. So by that definition, they might be human. But Simon struggles with his identity, feeling that if he doesn't have a real human body, he isn't really human. Furthermore, he feels that because he is occupying the body of a woman, he is far from being himself. Margini argues that the role of Baymax in Big Hero 6 is to show the viewer how powerful the relationship between human and machine is. However, while we don't get the same dichotomy of human and non-human characters in Soma, we do still see the power of that asymmetrical relationship. Still, Simon and Catherine are a blend of human and machine, and we can see that they overcome incredible obstacles to accomplish their mission and preserve the last hope of humanity. For me, the role of the companion in a horror game is an interesting one. When I was playing and first heard Catherine's voice over the radio, I was relieved that there was another human alive somewhere. When I found out that she was just a brain scan and a robot, I was really disappointed, just like Simon was. For the rest of the game, I was so attached to Catherine that I hated leaving her to go complete objectives. But through this attachment, she became a form of motivation. I knew that if I faced some horrifying or scary part of the game, I would be rewarded with a conversation with Catherine. That motivation helped me get past the parts of the game that really scared me, like when I had to restart the router at Theta. My attachment to Catherine also created mixed feelings for Simon, because there were times when he would lash out at her. I was horrified when Simon essentially killed her at the end of the game by making her so upset she short-circuited. The existence of Catherine seems to undermine the horror of the game in a way, because the easiest way to make something less scary is to add a friend. Horror games are not nearly as scary when played with a friend than when they are played alone. So it's impressive to me that Soma remains a really scary game, even though you have a friend for most of it. I think that just speaks to the efficacy of the horror in Soma. It manages to be scary, while also giving the player a friend to brave the horror with.
We are on the Ark, you idiot! I didn't lie! I can't be responsible for your goddamn ignorance!
Catherine? Catherine?